Hello. Yes, you can hear me. Good. My name is Casper Meyer. I'm the classical one of a professor of classical archaeology here at the Barts Graduate Center, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here tonight on behalf of our director Susan Weber to tonight's lecture by George Manginis. This event is part of our archaeological encounter series, which explores a wide array of topics relating to material pasts and presents and the persistence of the past into the future. Tonight's lecture promises to demonstrate that the past is never over and never separate from its contemporary memories or echoes. Dr. George Manginis is the academic director of the Benaki Museum in Athens. He trained in archaeology and art history at the University of Athens and SOAS in London, and has taught Islamic, Byzantine, Chinese art and at institutions such as the Courtauld, Edinburgh, the British Museum, and the V&A. He is a scholar of formidable breadth, with publications on topics ranging from Chinese ceramics to Islamic architecture, to the material worlds of the Greek and Armenian diasporas. And his curatorial work and research, including major exhibitions and publications on such as Mount Sinai, A History of Travelers and Pilgrims, China Rediscovered, the Benaki Museum collection of Chinese ceramics, and most recently, Imperial China, they all reflect an abiding interest in telling complex trans-regional stories through objects and images. We are delighted to host him tonight as he turns his attention to the modern history of an ancient form, the Klismos chair, to examine how this archetypal piece of ancient Greek furniture was reimagined in the mid-20th century by the designer T.H. Robsjohn-Gibbings for the manufacturer Saridis of Athens. Robsjohn-Gibbings is a compelling figure in the history of modern design, a polemicist, decorator, and classicist who rejected historicist revivalism in favor of what he called timeless design. His work merged Greek classicism with modernist restraint, and his vision of the Klismos as the epitome of rational elegance resonated in both elite interiors and mass market furniture lines. This same designer, who rallied against American nostalgia for European antiques, ended his career in Athens, gazing upon the Parthenon and crafting objects that flirted with prestige as much as with purity. So I'm very intrigued to hear how this oeuvre might fit in or fail to fit in into broader narratives of classical legacy. Dr. Manginis has, over the past few years, offered BGC students guided tours through the Benaki collection as part of their annual travel program. These tours are nothing short of exhilarating. They enchant our students without fail and are among my own most treasured museum experiences. As a Northern European classicist traveling to Greece for fieldwork, I belong to a long line tradition of outsiders who have tended to view modern Greece through the lens of its ancient ruins as an inadequate successor to the country's classical glory. This troubled dynamic, described as crypto-colonialism by the anthropologist Michael Herzfeld, continues to shape Western perceptions of Greek identity and heritage. The Benaki Museum, and particularly George Manginis' vision of it, offers a vital counterpoint with its inclusive collections of Byzantine, Islamic, Asian, as well as European decorative art. The Benaki disrupts any kind of simplistic accounts of Greek exceptionalism or Western continuity. It reconnects ancient Greece not with London or Berlin, but with Alexandria, Samarkand, Smyrna, among other places. So I can't really think of a more intriguing speaker to explore how Robsjohn-Gibbing's Klismos can be brought to resonate with this complex and entangled world of antiquity and its afterlives. Please join me to welcome George Manginis.
Many thanks, dear Caspar, for the kind introduction. I want it in writing, please, and the exciting invitation to lecture tonight. I would also like to thank Andrei Kircher for all his help with organizing my trip to the USA and tonight's event, and of course, all of you for joining us. When Caspar suggested that I give a lecture at Bard Graduate Center, students of which I had the pleasure of meeting at the Benaki Museum, I had the choice of sharing with you either a finished and polished piece of work or work in progress. And I chose the latter, as I concluded that, despite the challenge, it would offer you, the audience, a new take on a possibly familiar subject, and me, the lecturer, the priceless opportunity of your critical assessment. My topic is the well-known, often published and avidly collected Klismos range of furniture created by the American designer Terence Harold Robsjohn-Gibbings for Saridis of Athens and produced from the early 1960s and to this day in Greece. These pieces revive with archaeological precision furniture depicted on works of art from Greek antiquity that date between the mid 6th century and the mid 4th century BCE. The range comprises 26 items. In their various incarnations, varnished, lacquered, gilt or silvered, with or without cushions, they can be encountered in domestic and public interiors in Greece, the US, and elsewhere, but also in magazine editorials, in design and interiors books, and even in scholarly articles. I would like to single out two contributions on Robsjohn-Gibbings' work in general, one by James Burish, who completed a dissertation here in 2007 and published an article at the Archives of American Art in 2009, and another by Daniela Ohad, who contributed an article at the Journal of Interior Design in 2008. However, from the moment I developed an interest into the story of Gibby, that was Robsjohn-Gibbings' nickname, Gibby, and I'm going to use it because his name is a tongue twister. I realized that some facts about Klismos had not been stressed enough. For example, consider how unusual it is for one of the most successful designers in 1950s America to trust a small, by American standards, furniture maker, Eleftherios Saridis, for the manufacture of his dream furniture in a country at the edge of the Western Bloc during the Cold War. Yet, this furniture somehow managed to attract global attention and become Greece's foremost contribution to modern design. Furthermore, by studying the furniture itself and by reading the texts that Gibby left behind, I became convinced that his approach was not simply falling within the neoclassical tradition, which since the 18th century had revived ancient furniture and especially Klismos chairs again and again. It was indeed a personal quest following his own principles and informed by a particular brand of modernism. Moreover, I would argue that Gibbs' collaboration with a Greek manufacturer and eventual move to Athens represented the culmination of his career, a discharge of creativity in his late life, which ensured for him a special place in the annals of 20th century design. Some 7 years ago, I started collecting material with the aim to showcase this legacy at an exhibition in the Benaki Museum, the foremost institution researching and exhibiting architecture and design in Greece. Since 2022, I was lucky to have by my side Mr. Zois Spiliotis, the adopted son of Eleftherios Saridis, who holds the rights to Gibbs' Greek body of work and continues to manufacture the furniture on commission. The 26 designs are in the process of being included in the Register of Intangible Cultural Heritage of the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and in the National Directory of UNESCO. Fundraising permitting, in summer 2026 we shall be able to welcome you to an exhibition at the Benaki. This story does not belong to the past, although it is about very old designs indeed, but I think it's about time for me to start telling the story. Terence Harold Robsjohn-Gibbings was born in the United Kingdom in 1903. In his books, he gives 1905 as his date of birth, but his tombstone adds 2 years. In 1929, he moved to the United States, where he opened his own gallery in 1936. He soon developed a stellar clientele, both private and corporate. In 1936 to 37, he undertook his best-known commission from the pre-war period, the furnishings for the residence of Hilda Olsen Bold Weber in Bel Air, known by its later name, Casa Encantada. We're lucky to have photographs of interiors from the house soon after it was decorated, as well as 2 catalogues from the auction sale of the contents. They document a glamorous, unbridled version of neoclassicism, with lavish items like this piano, supported by a carved-in-the-round figure of Dionysus holding the thyrsus. However, among the fantastical items, there are a few that show a reserved, almost bookish obedience to ancient prototypes, as in this chair, table, and stools. During the 40s and 50s, Gibbing continued to undertake private commissions, but also started designing for major manufacturers, for example, Widdicombe Furniture Company of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Hansen Light & Co. of New York. His creativity and their capital made his designs ubiquitous and his name renowned. His claim to fame, even notoriety, was further consolidated through 3 books: Goodbye, Mr. Chippendale, from 1944, Mona Lisa's Moustache, a dissection of modern art, from 1947, and Homes of the Brave, from 1954. His witty and acerbic style of writing was exemplified in these 3 books, but also in articles for popular magazines. A paragraph from a 1945 letter to a Baltimore journalist is typical Gibbing. I quote, "Nothing could have pleased me more than your write-up in the Evening Sun. Thank God it was you who came to see me, because without your fine, intelligent discrimination, anything could have happened, as I'm completely useless to anyone before I have had my coffee in the morning and have no idea what I'm talking about." Unquote. In his 3 books, Gibbing laid out his views on 20th century design, aesthetics, and, in the end of the day, living. In Goodbye, Mr. Chippendale, he dismissed slavish copies of antique furniture in American homes and promoted an aesthetic that corresponded to contemporary needs. In Mona Lisa's Moustache, he humorously dismissed the excesses and occultism of modern art. It's a very good read. In Homes of the Brave, he pointed the arrows of his criticism and occasional admiration towards American architects and designers, from Frank Lloyd Wright to his day. Nothing seems further from Le Corbusian modernism than his concluding statement in the latter book. I quote, "These are the houses in which the interests and associations of the inhabitants radiate into every corner. Here is an atmosphere that glows with the presence of humanity, reflecting confidently and with pride the infinite variety of its individuality. Humanity, pride, individuality, within a few lines, so many words that refute the concept of living in a machine. The 1950s were a golden era for Gibby, and this is reflected in his name being pasted across hundreds of advertisements in all sorts of magazines. His fame must have attracted the attention of the second major character of our story, Eleftherios Saridis, the Greek furniture maker. Born in Istanbul, where a sizable Greek community prospered in the late 19th and early 20th century, Saridis moved to Athens and by 1924 had acquired exclusive control of one of Greece's largest furniture manufactories, situated not far from the Acropolis. His first wife was the highly educated Susan, née Giovanni. By the early 1930s, Saridis was one of the major businessmen in a country that was trying to industrialize under the progressive government of Eleftherios Venizelos. The late 20s and the first half of the 30s in Greece were times of political pragmatism and economic development that tried to heal the wounds of 19th and early 20th century irredentism. It was also a time of realignment of Greek identity politics, which in the previous century had relied heavily on Western European neoclassicism for ideas and artistic forms of expression. Interwar classicism was imbued with the melancholy worldview of the period, and I would say with a certain grittiness, a realism that was grounded in direct readings of the classics and hands-on studies of the archaeological record. Both of the photographs we just saw, the one in the theatre and this one, were taken in 1930 in Delphi by Eleftherios Saridis, better known as Nellis. So I'm going to use Nellis, which is easier. The seminal Greek photographer of the period. She documented the Delphic festivals organized by poet Angelos Ikelianos and his wife Eva Palmer. Palmer was American. She was a Boston heiress that channeled her considerable resources in reviving ancient drama and even wove herself in her loom the fabrics for the costumes. That same year, Nellis shot the near-naked Russian dancer Lila Nikolska in front of the Parthenon, causing a scandal not so much for the nudity, but for the unprecedented access to the ancient monument. Like many in her generation, she wanted to bridge Greece's glorious past with the present. In 1939, she traveled to New York with 6 vast prints, photographic collages called parallels. They were exhibited at the Greek Pavilion in the World's Fair in Queens, dedicated to the world of tomorrow. A few years later, in 1947, this formal juxtaposition of faces, buildings, and shapes from Greece's long history and its idealized present attracted the attention of classical archaeologist Gisela Richter. The legendary curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art wrote to Nellis, "Your photographs are the best propaganda for contemporary Greece that I have seen." Back in Athens, the country was ruled by the fascist-leaning army general Ioannis Metaxas, seen here on the left, with Saridis, a few weeks after Italy declared war on Greece. I don't know what he was doing in a furniture shop. That war was won by the Greeks, but the German invasion that followed could not be resisted, and an Axis occupation lasted until October 1944. However, what ensued between 1946 and 1949 was equally catastrophic. A civil war between the royalist government of Athens and the communist government in the north. It was the first proxy conflict of the Cold War and the earliest example of post-war involvement on the part of the Allies in the internal affairs of a foreign country. The Soviet Union and its Balkan allies on the side of the communists, the United Kingdom and the United States on the side of the royalists. The government was funded by the USA through the Truman Doctrine of 1947 and the Marshall Plan of 1948. Eventually, Greece joined NATO in 1952, 3 years after the Civil War had ended. The decade that followed was characterized by divisive politics, with systematic persecution and displacements of individuals or groups suspected of communist leanings. It also witnessed an aggressive push for rebuilding and modernization. Athens was transformed from a quaint Balkan capital with neoclassical mansions and dirt streets into an asphalt and concrete Near Eastern metropolis. The way this happened was the policy of antiparochi, property swap. Antiparochi entailed the concession of land to developers in return for a share in the resulting apartment buildings. So Athens ended up to being the concrete sea that you see today. Major public works heralded this new era, and at least three had strong American flavor. The new embassy of the United States was the work of Walter Gropius, finished in 1961. The Aero Saarinen designed Athens airport terminal dated from the same year, 1961. And then there was the slightly later Hilton Hotel behemoth. These buildings exemplified both post-war modernity and a new classicism. This was also the golden age for Greek archaeology, with major excavations across the country and extensive landscaping projects ensuring tourist access to the most important sites. However, if we look at this classicism of the 50s, efforts to creatively reinterpret the classical past were really few. The superb landscaping of the Athens Acropolis by Dimitris Pikionis is a rare exception. There was a preference for simply displaying the antique, merely showcasing it within a modernist frame. And it would fall to a later generation in the 70s to infuse the country's classical past with contemporary urgency. They were reacting to the kitsch of the 1967 to 74 dictatorship. But back in the 50s and the 60s, ancient Greece was preserved in chilled aspect. Nevertheless, during the premierships of right-wing Konstantinos Karamanlis between 55 and 63, and liberal Georgios Papandreou between 63 and 65, the country witnessed economic development and international exposure, becoming a popular destination for tourism and culture. And we can see here the Saridis couple with the doyen of American furniture makers, Hollis Baker. Greek shipping rose to the prominent position it still holds, and figures like Stavros Niarchos and Aristotle Onassis, seen here within the same frame but decidedly not together, became household names. Maria Callas sang in Dallas, as the song goes, wearing dresses designed by Yannis Tsarouchis. And Melina Mercouri, in Never on Sunday, sang The Boys of Piraeus, which won the 1960 Academy Award for Best Original Song. The next year, she was immortalized in the streets of Athens by Slim Aarons. Now, the year 1961 went down in Greek political history as the election year when even the dead voted for the conservative government. However, it was also the high point of this Greek cultural resurgence. In early June, America's First Lady visited Athens and met with King Paul and Queen Frederica. A few days earlier, their Majesties had gone to see a furniture show at the Saridis factory. These two events, Jackie Kennedy's short break and the royal visit to the Saridis exhibition, were reported in the same newsreel, which brings us back to Robsjohn-Gibbings and his creations.
Την πρωτότυπη έκθεση επίπλων σε αρχαϊκό ελληνικό στυλ επισκέφθησαν εαυτόν μεγαλειότητες οι βασιλείς με την πριγκίπισσα Ειρήνη. Η έκθεση περιλαμβάνει τραπέζια σε διάφορα μεγέθη και σχήματα, ανάκλυντρα συμποσίου, δίφρους και καθίσματα. Τα αντικείμενα αυτά κατασκευάστησαν σε μοντερνοποιημένο τύπο, ύστερα από προσεκτική μελέτη των αντιστοίχων αυθεντικών αντικειμένων της κλασικής Ελλάδος, όπως αναπαριστώνται στα αγγεία, τους αμφορείς και τα γλυπτά της εποχής εκείνης. Στα έπιπλα αυτά, που είναι όλα από ελληνική καρυδιά, έχουν σκαλιστεί ελληνικές παραστάσεις.
Don't worry about the text, it's all wrong. Now, it is yet unclear when the very first contact between Gibbing and Saridis happened. The person who must have forged the connection was Susan Saridis, although Gibbing and his life partner, Carlton Pullen, described in this article as his associate, must have visited Greece in previous years. The protracted process of furniture production involved both technical experimentation and academic research. This was provided by no other than Gisela Richter, the Met curator who a decade earlier had admired Nelly's parallels. And in this photograph, she is approving the reconstruction of an ancient leg found in the Crimea. It is held up by Eleftherios Saridis, while Susan is seated close by. The photographs from the public preview on May 31st, 1961, have been preserved at the Benaki Museum Photographic Archives, and we are now restoring and digitizing the negatives, and then we have to identify all the people. This one, however, was printed at the time and survives in the Saridis archive. Pullen, Susan, and Eleftherios Saridis, and Gibbing, moments before the preview, are ready to amaze their audience in the small museum they had created within the Saridis factory. The range included a variety of chairs, stools, and tables, as well as a footstool, a chest, and a couch or daybed, each model bearing a single number for identification. The chairs fall, all of them, within the Klismos form, featuring 4 curved legs, a curved backrest, and seats of woven leather cord supporting cushions. Number 3 is perhaps the best known, as it is both lightweight and bold in shape. It consists of 3 pieces doweled together into the deep backrest, 1 flat backsplat, 2 S-shaped rear legs, 2 more pieces used for the front legs, 4 seat rails, and visible dowels holding the whole together. Gibbing copied number 3 from a red figure Likithos in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, down to the raised detail along the leg, and you can see it in this chair as well. Chair number 7 is larger, heavier, and the leather cord is woven within rather than around the seat rails. That's why we can't see it. It was reportedly inspired by the stele of Iso from the Klismos of Athens, kept at the city's National Archaeological Museum. However, more than 20 years earlier, Gibbing had designed for the Weber residence a very similar chair. Examples number 5, after a red figure levis at the Met, and number 15, after a Kilix by Douris in Berlin, feature a shallower backrest, whereas in chair number 13, the rear legs extend into ears. It was taken from a black figure pinax by Exekias. Now, the chair showcased tonight, kindly lent to us by Tria Jovan, is a number 15. So you see, it isn't as deep, the backrest, but it still has this very lovely detail copied from the Likithos, which accentuates the curve of the legs. The daybed, or couch number 11, follows chair number 3, but extends boldly into a resolutely modern interpretation. The origin of the design is given as the bed of Procrustes. He was a mythological bandit. He would cut the feet of those too tall for the bed, or would pull to death those too short in order to make them fit on the furniture. And he sounds like an interior decorator to me. And the scene was encountered on a Kilix with the adventures of Theseus, found in Spina, near Ferrara, in Italy. The most numerous category are the stools. Number 1 brings to life the stools on which the gods sit on the Parthenon frieze. The sparse outline of number 2 revives a less celebrated object, a humble terracotta model in Munich, whereas number 14 corresponds to one of Greek pottery's masterpieces, the schoolroom Kilix by Douris in Berlin. The curved legs and cubes between the seat rails had already inspired Gibbing when he designed the Weber residence. Number 16 harks back to a funerary stele reportedly at the National Archaeological Museum, while number 19, with pronounced spherical leg tops, references a cup by Onyssimos in Berlin. Truncated pyramids sit atop the legs of number 20, after Kilikes by the Antiphon painter, like this one in a private collection, and this one in the National Archaeological Museum of Ferrara. The same pyramids crown the curved legs of number 21 after another Kilix in Berlin. The group of stools concludes with 3 X-framed examples. Number 26 in wood, bronze and leather, after an amphora by the Affecter painter in the British Museum, and 2 folding stools. Number 9 with animal legs, after the same pinax by Exekias, and already made into a table for the Weber residence, and number 24 with lion paw feet, after a statue at the Archaeological Museum of Keramikos, ancient Athens' cemetery. One of the most perplexing items to be included in the range is the footstool number 22. It's this big. Inspired by a stele in the Archaeological Museum of Thebes, its intended use in the mid-20th century is unclear. What do you do with it? It seems as if both Gibbing and Saridis could not resist such a beautiful piece of woodwork, although commercial prospects were most uncertain. Another sizable group in the series are the tables, all of them side tables rather than dining or coffee tables, as was Greek custom. The only one with 4 legs is the sparse number 8, depicted on the so-called Charonion relief kept today at Keramikos. Tripod tables include curved legs examples like number 12, taken from an Idria by the Leningrad painter, nowadays in a corporate collection in Naples. In the red figure seen on the ancient vase, the table sits next to a painter working on an oversized cantharos. A similar arrangement of straight legs, joined by stretchers, appears on number 4, lifted from a Cypriot statuette in the British Museum, one of the very few three-dimensional originals used by Gibbing. Wooden legs are replaced by bronze legs in number 10, after another Kilix by the Antiphon painter in Berlin. In the same museum, the bronze statuette of a dancer suggests an appropriate and very Greek way to use the table. The legs on this table were cast after an original in the Palermo Museum and were also used for the round table number 17, after an example on a crater in Naples. Once again, Gibbing had already experimented on the form of this table at the Weber residence. The round-top tripod number 6 references Eleftherios in the Hermitage, but sadly I could not find a better view than this. You can see it in the white square back there. We already saw one of the legs presented to Gisela Richter earlier on. The table series concludes with the table number 18, after a Dinos from the Met, and with another tripod, number 25, with heavily carved animal paw and swan head legs after a Hellenistic leg from Egypt, now in Brussels. This, because of all the carving, is the most expensive item in the range. The final object in the series is the chest number 23. Its shape derives from the chests on which gods sit in Parthenon's east pediment. The painted decoration on some examples is based on a detail from an amphora at the Archaeological Museum in Madrid. Beyond shapes, Klismos furniture derived all of the decorative details from ancient sources. According to Gibbing, the light-colored walnut wood was chosen because of the color of a chair on a white ground likithos by the Achilles painter in the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. The leather webbing for the seating was inspired by a chair carried by a satyr in the British Museum, and you can see it here. Finally, cushions were woven by either the Piraiki Patraiki Company or the Hellenikos Spiti manufactory. Hellenikos Spiti was founded by Greece's pioneering folklorist Angeliki Hatzimichali and was meant to give employment to young women. The motifs of the textiles were also designed by Gibbing, and they were taken from ancient examples like this likithos by the washing painter in the Met, or the famous Psyktir by Eleftherios in the Hermitage, depicting courtesans at a banquet. Now, these are the items of the Klismos range. designed by Robsjohn-Gibbings, produced by Saridis of Athens, and launched onto the world in spring 1961. As I have already pointed out, 4 of these designs had already been worked on for the Weber residence in Bel Air as early as 1937, and probably even earlier. I would argue that over more than 20 years, Gibbing, assisted by Pulin, had been gathering material, researching, and experimenting with different forms of ancient Greek furniture. The collaboration with Saridis, an assertive furniture maker ideally situated in Greece, the very place of inspiration, helped Gibbing realize an old dream without any of the limitations that a more commercially minded industrialist would have placed in his way. Although Saridis was at first reluctant to invest, he soon realized the potential. Alongside Gibbing, Pulin, and Mrs. Saridis, he embarked on a promotional campaign, the likes of which no Greek product had ever seen. A campaign that ensured a lasting legacy to this day. Even before the official launch, in April 1961, Loomis Dean, a Life magazine photographer, was invited to take a series of shots of the furniture within ancient sites. Now, although back in 1930 Nellis had been able to shoot Nikolska naked in the Parthenon, the idea of photographing modern furniture, and especially furniture that would be available for sale, was anathema by 1961. However, Saridis' connections with the great and the good managed to overcome this impediment. In this photograph, Mrs. Saridis and Gibbing are accompanied by Ioannis Papadimitriou, who was the head of the mighty Greek archaeological service. His friendship with Nicholas and Dolly Goulandris, collectors and admirers of Gibbing's work, may have had something to do with this. They were among the first to buy Klismos furniture for their flat in Athens, decorated in its entirety by Gibbing. The live feature appeared in the September 1961 issue, dedicated entirely, otherwise, to ways of surviving a nuclear fallout. Now, the nightmare of total annihilation contrasted with the radiant colors of the Dean photos, encapsulating the allure of a Greek island summer and the elegance of Klismos against blue skies. Slim Aarons also immortalized Klismos in his bon chic, bon genre style. In this shot, the Saridis couple sit on a number 11 daybed with Acropolis in the background, whereas Aarons himself relaxes on a number 3 chair. Now, this image is dated by Getty in 1955, but it was definitely shot in 1961. By October 1962, Klismos had reached New York City, and in no less glamorous place than Fifth Avenue. Jean Moore, the legendary artistic director, vice president, and window dresser of Tiffany's, designed Greek-inspired models, furnished with Klismos miniatures specially made by Saridis for this presentation. So you can see these are furniture, they are that small, they still exist in the archive, and that thing over there is a diamond. By 1963, the full-scale items would get their first museum exhibition in Ghent, at the Museum of Decorative Arts and Industrial Design, nowadays Design Museum Ghent. That same year, Gibbing's last book, Furniture of Classical Greece, appeared in print. It was co-authored by Pulin and documented their effort. By 1964, Klismos furniture had its very own corner on the Rue Royale in Paris, bizarrely decorated with trellis work, singerie, and a floral carpet. This was the showroom of the world's chicest decorator, Maison Jansin. It is truly entertaining to spot Klismos furniture in interiors, in photo shoots, in artworks from the 60s to this day. They're ubiquitous. I'm simply showing one image, Karl Lagerfeld's dining room in his house outside Paris, now auctioned off, and one painting by Los Angeles-based Greek artist Konstantinos Kakanias. In this 2020 work, his heroine, Mrs. Tependris, an activist Greek socialite, is lounging on a daybed during the pandemic. But what about Gibbing? By 1963, he had settled in Athens, on the Onision Areopagitou Street, a stone's throw from the Acropolis and a short ride from many of his favorite antiquities. He continued working for Saridis, designing hundreds of new items of furniture, adapted designs from the antique. He also took private decorating commissions for, among others, Aristotle Onassis. Jackie never made it to the 1961 opening, but she had the opportunity to use Gibbing designs a few years later in the context of another life. Klismos was used for public interiors. For example, rooms at the Athens Hilton Hotel and the governor's suite on the top floor of the Bank of Greece, one of the most important 1960s interiors that remains largely untouched. In 1973, he decorated a new wing at the Benaki Museum. The wing doesn't exist because the museum was completely refurbished in the 90s. And I have already mentioned the best known of Gibbing's private Athenian commissions, the Goulandris flat, which was featured in the February 16, 1963 issue of American Vogue, photographed by Jon Stewart. Beyond work, Gibbing built a charmed life in his late years in Athens. He appeared enjoying restaurants and parties with Carlton and the Saridis couple. However, between 1967 and 1974, the country but Gibbing had adopted as his home, was suffering under dictatorship, sustained for 7 years with a little help from friends in a Gropius-designed embassy. During the dictatorship, the post-war vision of antiquity lost most of its purity and assumed a tawdry appearance. Gibbing lived to see democracy return to its birthplace. He died on October 20, 1976, and was buried at the First Cemetery of Athens. Carlton donated to the Benaki Museum 3 items manifesting their eclectic taste: 2 fragments of late antique textiles and a fragment of an Iranian, possibly Timurid, tile. Carlton died in 1983 and was buried next to Gibbing in a twin tomb. This was probably a reference to the hundreds of twin burials discovered near the battleground of Cheronia, where in 338 BCE the Macedonians massacred the Sacred Band of Thebes. The Sacred Band was an army of couples of male lovers who always fought and died side by side. The Battle of Cheronia marked the end of the classical era of democracy and proportion, and the coming of a new age of empire. So I think it is a good point to mark the end of tonight's lecture. Gibbey's legacy lives on in the 21st century, and I hope it will continue to inspire as a way of studying, bringing to life, and experiencing the past through a genuinely creative process. But for now, please bid farewell to him and his friends, and accept my gratitude for your patience.
Absolutely wonderful. That was stunning. Thank you so much, George. We open the floor to questions.
Okay. So, George, thanks for a super interesting presentation. I think that, and to mentioning my own essay, and I want to say that contextualizing Robsjohn-Gibbing's furniture within Greek contemporary culture and revival of interest in history, I think that's really brilliant, refreshing, and super intriguing. So thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? Oh, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It may be a naive question. Where does the word Klismos comes from?
Yes, I looked it up. It's just a word. I mean, it doesn't seem to have a particularly etymological importance, but it refers to this. So I've used it, I've sort of stretched it to include the whole range because it is such a good word. But actually, it is these chairs with the curved back and the saber legs.
Hi. So I'm curious, did Gibbey keep detailed notes on what artworks inspired which designs, or is that something you guys had to research?
Now, in the book, he mentions his sources. And if you see in the photographs I showed of the museum they had built, they had the vases and the sculptures, etc., hanging above each piece. However, I tried to find new photographs for everything. I double checked the sources, and some things have been moved, some things are in other museums. And in some cases, I think that he just chose things that he was kind of emotionally connected with. Because, and in this the particular case of the Cluny, of the daybed, it's quite a far stretch. I mean, the design doesn't look very much like the one on the vase with Procrustes, with the bandit. So I think it was a deeply personal process of attribution. However, when Gisela Richter got involved, oh, she was a Nazi. You know, I mean, she really went down and said, you know, and it's mentioned in the book that days before the opening of the exhibition, that tripod table that from the Cypriot relief, she said, oh, that's, you know, the stretcher is the wrong shape. And they had to go back into production. And this is not handmade, this is industrial production. It's very hard to completely remake all the examples. So we have to take Gibbey's statements with a pinch of salt, and then we have to try to see the scholar, as in Carlton, who was much more scholarly, or Richter, going into that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. As many people in this room know, neoclassical furniture has a long history between ancient Greece and the 20th century. So how much did he look at, let's say, 18th century models, early 19th century, even earlier Renaissance imaginary furniture from Greece? Was that influential to him? Because you presented it in a beautifully clean way, that it was just the ancient past and then the 1950s. But what about the period in between?
He didn't want to know it. I mean, he actually was polemical about it. He wasn't keen. I mentioned the books, and if you read the books, you'll see his polemics against sort of these revivals. And he believed that somehow the best way to reach the contemporary was going through the antique, because he thought that this antique had a purity which was denied to furniture in later centuries, especially the 18th century, which I don't think he particularly cared for. So I think that it was a very strange um, archaism. In the next year that I'm going to, work more and more on that. I said this is work in progress. I have to really define classicism, neoclassicism, and perhaps even archaism with him, because there are many scholars that looked into the archaic rather than the classical, either going towards prehistory or going towards the original. It's quite a good question. We're doing a conference at the Benaki in May about archaisms, so that will be one of my questions.
Thank you. That was amazing. I want to follow up from what you just said, starting with how did he identify the models which he reproduced? I mean, Richter's book, I guess, but there may be more. And then, if he had some sort of ideas of what kind of art, of what periods of Greek art were to be imitated, you showed a range of things, but most of them were Greek vases of the 6th and 5th centuries. So, okay, these are full of imagery, but were there also some aesthetic or other principles or art historical principles that guided his choices?
Well, I think he traveled a lot and he saw a lot, and he worked with Carlton and with Richter very much. I was most amazed at the painted detail on the chest, which he spotted in this amphora in Madrid. The Archaeological Museum in Madrid has many amphoras, and to sort of single this out was quite extraordinary. I don't know who did it, but that was amazing. But I think it was over many years and over a lot of traveling and a lot of going through books, through corpora of vases, through publications. Actually, apart from the 3 objects they gave to the Benaki, they gave a few books, which again show then they are not the classics, they are really learned books. Now, the date range is really the classical period, with a little bit going back into the 6th century BC. So he really looks at the 5th and 4th centuries very consciously. And because he thinks that's the age of purity. And that's why I thought that putting the stop at the Battle of Heronia, really, when Alexander destroys, with his father, destroys the classical world, and a new world is born, this is when Gibbs references stop. That's it.
Any other questions?
Was there ever an attempt between what he did at the Casa in California and this line that references, there was such a clear just connection between, they almost seem like bookends, like what happened in the middle, and was he bringing in these neoclassical elements along the way or not? Because I know some of the Whitcomb stuff is very different than this.
Yeah. Well, Yes, there was. But he did, apart from the mass production he did for Widdicombe, he did private commissions. And in the private commissions, there are furniture which have this sort of classical air. He kept on producing these things, but he never did it uh, uh, in a popular sort of scale. I'm not saying that the Saridis furniture is cheap, but it is industrially produced. And whereas the Casa and Cantata things, they were produced by artisans in Pasadena, I think, and they were very expensive things, very expensive. And to give you an idea of what the expense of even this, which is the relatively simple chair, is, if you notice the rear legs, they're a single piece of wood. And these are rather restrained. When you go to number 3 or number 7, which have this very deep curvature, and they are from a single piece of walnut, you have to have a piece that tall and that thick to carve one leg. And if there is any problem and you can't see the problem in the wood when you start carving, you have to discard it. So even with at Saridis, with this very good machinery that he had, this was an expensive process. When it's done at an artisanal level, at a craft level, and everything has to be designed, from scratch, because for a craftsperson, it's from scratch. A design is a different thing. Then it is very expensive. So he did do these classical pieces, but we have to sort of single them out here and there. They're rare.
Hi, I think I'm familiar with a Robsjohn-Gibbings bedroom set, probably purchased in the early 40s, and it's very handsome and modern, quite modern in its look. And I was just wondering, what was going on in the 40s? This would have been mass-produced um, chair, table, side tables, bed, dresser, and dressing table with flipped up with a mirror. What was happening around the 40s?
Well, I think he started producing for Widdicombe in 46, 47. That's the sort of timeline. And he designed huge ranges. I mean, every year he would do 50 or more different designs, and he would repeat designs from a year to the next. He did that over 9 years for Widdicombe. And these were done in various woods and various finishes, and they were available throughout the States, everywhere. So there are a lot of advertisements in magazines, of exhibitions in pretty much everywhere, not just where they were produced in Michigan. So these were furnitures for American homes corresponding to contemporary needs. So a bedroom suite is very much the thing he would produce. Whereas when we go to Klismos, there's not a single eating table. There's not a dining room table. You can't eat out of any of these. They're all side tables. So they're not very practical. And that's an interesting thing. And then he had to do about 1,000 designs. I'm not exaggerating, which in Saridis they call them adaptés, the adapted designs, which are classical but with a modern use. So you do get a dining room table there.
I think the most important question for last, what is the timeline for the exhibition and when will tickets go on sale?
Oh, hopefully in summer 26. I thought summer is a good time because, you will be able to come.
We will see you in Athens. Thank you very much again, George. It was wonderful.